the street or subway, you would never know that this is an election year. Life just goes on. But every election is important, as they say, and this year is no exception. We're in this paradox where, on one hand, we're living in the best of times. The city is booming, there's influx of people coming in, and it's a great place to live. But then when you dig a little deeper and look at certain pockets of neighborhoods, people are also suffering. And this paradox has existed in the city time and time again. But tonight, we will explore these real issues that affect real people in their real lives. And to that end, we will have a discussion and a debate on the following topics: education, housing, transit, public safety, economic development, and the elusive topic of quality of life issues. And these 6 candidates share their vision to how to move the city forward. Before I get to the introductions, I want to quickly tell you more about this organization. My name is Thomas Kim, and I'm the founder and director of the NYC Political Forum. It's a nonpartisan civic organization founded in 2013. We are 1,600 members strong, and we have cards and other information, so please check it out. We have abundance of other events that we offer throughout the year, free of charge, and the whole idea is for fellow New Yorkers to get involved, and let's talk about the issues. So before I introduce the candidates, I just want to explain how this process worked. We sent out the invitations to all declared candidates, and some candidates did not either respond or they couldn't make it. I guess the biggest elephant that is not in this room tonight is that very empty chair sitting on the corner. Does anyone know if there's some special event in Frankfurt, Germany tonight, perhaps? And we also sent out invitations to Assemblywoman Nicole Maliotakis, and she did not respond. And we previously had a commitment with Bo Dietl, but he had other schedule conflicts, so too bad. Okay, so the candidates will be introduced alphabetically. So we'll start out with Sal Albanese. Sal was born in Italy and immigrated to Brooklyn at the age of 8. He graduated from John Jay High School and received his bachelor's in CUNY York College, later earned a master's in NYU, and also a law degree from Brooklyn Law School. Sal was a New York City public school teacher for 11 years, and at the urging of his residents, he ran for city council, defeated a 21-year incumbent who was a conservative Republican in the Brooklyn area, and he served 4 terms, so this is before term limits, representing southwestern Brooklyn until 1997, when he declared his first candidate for the mayor of New York City. As a councilman, Sal was a member of the Public Safety, Education, and Transportation Committees, an expert on police issues. He successfully worked with community leaders to put more officers on patrol and improve community police relations. Throughout his career, Sal has been a strong supporter of human rights and also helped pass one of the first bills in the nation that prohibited housing and employment discrimination based on sexual orientation. It's my honor to introduce you to Sal. Okay, next we have Richard Bashner. Richard is a commercial attorney and a member of Community Board in Brooklyn, Community Board 6. He worked for 18 years to protect and cultivate our neighborhoods. About 4 years was spent as chair of Brooklyn Community Board 6, and 15 years on its executive committee, and as a chair of the community development. He graduated from Harvard and earned his Juris Doctorate from NYU School of Law. And he served as a law clerk to federal judge Edward Corman of the Eastern District of New York. Later worked as an associate at a large law firm in Manhattan and has been a partner at the law firm of Becker Glynn since 1998. Welcome. Okay, next we have Akeem Browder. Akeem is a social justice advocate and an agent of change. The Bronx native works to honor the legacy of his brother Khalif Browder and his mother Vanita Browder, to work with elected officials, lawyers, doctors, and college students to change laws and policies and regulations that devastate poor communities and families that have been impacted by mass incarceration and solitary confinement in state prisons. He is the founder of Shutdown Rikers and also the Khalif Browder Foundation. He's a civil engineer by trade. Welcome, Akeem.
But we didn't expect. Oh, here he is.
Okay, next we have Aaron Commey. He was born and raised in New York and has been an active community since a very young age. He has taught legal research and tutored adults to receive their GEDs, and he's an avid student of the law. Aaron has been involved in political activism, including advocating advocating in favor of massive criminal justice reform. He's a member of the Libertarian Party of Manhattan, and he's also the executive committee and a director of events for the Manhattan Libertarian Party. Welcome, Aaron. Okay, next we have Bob Gangi. Where are you, Bob? Right. Bob was born and raised in Flatbush and lived in Bensonhurst neighborhood in Brooklyn. He attended Catholic schools for 12 years, then went on to Columbia as an English major. As a lifelong New Yorker, he has lived in a rent-stabilized apartment on the West Side for the past 42 years. He is married to Dr. Barbara Kerr Gangi, a psychotherapist now semi-retired. He's been a social and racial justice activist in the city for the past 50 years. He's the director of the Correctional Association of New York, a prison reform organization for the past 29 years, and director of PROP, P-R-O-P, for 6 years, focused on exposing and ending abuse and discrimination in policing. Finally, unlike the mayor that's not here tonight, he cheers for New York sports teams, and most importantly, he dares not to eat pizza with a fork and a knife. Welcome, Bob. Okay, last but not least.
One Yankee hat in the audience, so please.
Okay, last but not least is Mike Tolkin. Mike is a native New Yorker and a tech entrepreneur. Mike is uniquely positioned to do for New York what has been going on in the private sector for many years, which is to create new ways to approach and solve problems. Mike has built his career as an innovator, founding, advising and investing in companies that aim to thrill, inspire, and make our world a better place. Mike is running for mayor to ensure that all New Yorkers are able to benefit from the great shifts in economy that lies ahead. His Smart Cities platform is built upon the principles of design and innovation, using the latest technological tools and practices to create new jobs, fix our antiquated infrastructure, and upgrade our city services, as well as prepare our kids for the jobs of tomorrow. Welcome, Mike. Okay, Okay, so before we get started, we'll just go over the format real quick and we'll dive right into it. So the format goes like this. You'll hear the opening statements in alphabetical order for 3 minutes, and then we will do questions by the moderator. So I'll select each candidate to answer questions, and then we'll have a crossfire, which each candidate will have an opportunity to ask a question to another candidate. And then we'll move on to the main portion of the event, which is the town hall, where you could direct questions to any of the candidates. There's a microphone right up here to my right. And then there will be a lightning round. That's where I ask rapid questions in a short yes/no response or for or against type of response. And then we'll close out with the closing statements in reverse alphabetical order. Just a reminder, the bar that's behind you will close at 9:30, so just be mindful of that for those who want to go to the bar. And with that being said, we will open with the opening statement from Sal Albanese.
Will the time limit be time? Will we get a sort of an alert that we got 30 seconds left, that kind of stuff?
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. This beautiful, beautiful venue. Probably the best venue of our campaign season. So thank you for being here. I want to thank the sponsors. I'm Sal Albanese, and I'm in this race because I believe that under this administration, the city's become less livable, and major issues are not being addressed. Beginning with our mass transit system, I want to be the mass transit mayor. I've been talking about mass transit since 1996. I actually rode the subway for 24 hours to point out that the system was being defunded and we would have these major problems. In 2013, I said the city's share should be increased. And we've got this, our mayor hasn't addressed it at all. For 3.5 years, he said it's not his job. I have a proposal to fund the system short range and long range. I want to increase the city's share. I also want to have a portion of the personal income tax that the city and the state collects, actually the state, and target it to the MTA and target it to the signal system. The biggest problem that we have with our transit system is the signal system is from 1904. It's actually being held together by Scotch State. That's why we have delays. That's why the trains, they can't run as many trains as possible, and impact the city's life, economic life, and the environment. And I'm not only criticizing this administration and the government as a whole around mass transit, I've got a funding proposal as well, and I will focus heavily on that system because I do believe it's the most important system in the city for all New Yorkers. I also support reducing the fare for low-income New Yorkers so they can get to work and not have to pay exorbitant rate increases. I also want to extend mass transit into transit deserts in the city. There are places where we have 2 fare zones. There's no reason why we can't extend the subway service and our surface transit to those communities. The other issue, which is a major concern for most New Yorkers and for me as well, is the issue of homelessness. We have the largest homeless population in the city's history. We're spending $2 billion, and that's related to affordable housing. Part of the problem with de Blasio's zoning policies is they're creating displacement. Many neighborhoods around the city where speculators are moving in ahead of the zoning policies, property values are skyrocketing, people who've lived there all their lives can't afford it. I've got a proposal to build true affordable housing, which I'll be happy to discuss later on in the forum. And of course, the other issue, which has been a burning issue with me over the years, is political corruption. When I was a council member, I championed political reform, and I've got a number of proposals to really increase participation in democracy. We have a pay-to-play system. The mayor's been under 8 investigations, and basically the message in New York City is if you have a lot of money, you can buy access to government. If you're an average citizen, you can't do that. I've got a proposal that I want to talk about later on called democracy vouchers, which would revamp the whole system, enhance democracy, and eliminate pay-to-play and bundling by by people who do business with the city. And I look forward to discussing that with you later on in the venue. Thank you for listening. It's great to be here.
Okay, thank you, Sal. We'll move on to Mr. Bashner.
Thank you, Thomas. I'd like to thank the New York City Political Forum for giving us this opportunity to help us discuss all the pressing issues of New York City. As you mentioned, Mayor de Blasio is not here. He has not been at most of the debates that the rest of us attended, and he's just looking to run out the clock. Received a veteran's pension as a result, because it was back when he was in the Army that the disease began to strike him. He was unable to work as a result, and neither of my parents or my grandparents had graduated from college. And there were a lot of gangs in the Bronx back in the 60s and early 70s, and a lot of problems growing up. Despite all of that, somehow I got into Harvard College, and I worked my way through Harvard and then NYU Law School, and then I became a law clerk to a federal judge, and went on to have a really good career in practicing law. I've headed up the real estate practice at a mid-sized law firm for the past 20 years or so. I've been a partner there. I got married and moved to Brooklyn right after law. Well, I moved to Brooklyn first, and then I got married. My wife and I have 2 kids. My wife is an OBGYN with a practice here in Manhattan. I have a son who just started at the University of Rochester. Thank you. And my daughter goes to Bard High School Early College, which is a terrific public school here in New York, over on Houston Street. So when my son was born in 1998, I decided that we've been pretty fortunate, and I wanted to give something back to the community, and I volunteered for Brooklyn Community Board 6. I didn't have any political connections. I just wanted to do what I could to help the neighborhood and protect the neighborhood and work on creating real opportunities for people. And so I've been on Brooklyn Community Board 6 now for 18 years and constantly promoted there. I was the, I was the chair for 4 years, and I was on the executive committee for 15 years. And during that time, I've developed the skills to build consensus, work with people, and to get down to business and really do what we need to do to move New York City forward. I think there are so many ways that the mayor has failed, and I guess we'll get into that in more detail as we go through it. The mayor has had a corrupt administration in which he has accepted money from developers and lobbyists and campaign contributors. We need to do what's best for all New Yorkers, not what's best for the people who contribute money. We have 40% more people on the streets this year than last year, sleeping in the streets. We have schools that are failing, subways that are failing, and I guess I'm out of time. We'll continue.
Okay, we'll move on to Mr. Browder.
Good evening, everyone. Before I start off, I just want to say I am my brother's keeper. Yeah, actually. Thank you. Let's get that over here. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. I want to start off by saying I am my brother's keeper, and I'd like for everyone to take a second to understand what that means to you individually. We have problems in New York, right? And what I firmly believe is that we can sit here and talk about our problems, in which we know we live in New York. We know the problems of New York, and real firm affirmative action means action. It's an action word for a reason. We can't talk about it. I'm not here to pull heartstrings at what you feel or what you believe is our problems. Real solutions come with real answers. Our communities face a lot of injustices and throughout all the departments that's supposed to serve us, and that's what we're here saying we want to do as candidates. We want to serve the community. How many times have we heard this though? It's not about what we say we want to do, it's what community relations we have that people know what we go through. It's time and time again that we put people in office that don't resemble the communities. They don't live in the neighborhoods that we live in, go through the hardships we go through, and don't actually understand what it feels like or means to go into affordable living households or to make minimum wage income. And so when we put legislative people in office that make 100,000 or 120,000, like our current incumbent. They don't understand what we go through as regular New Yorkers, so they never actually will go into office and represent us. From business owners to workers, I empathize with the families that go through hardships with what our students and our families that can't afford the proper education because although we want to, we still have to just deal with things that we can't have because we can't afford, and our city is growing into a place that we just have to move out. And I want to keep New Yorkers here in New York. I want to make sure our small business owners get the chance to thrive and stay in our communities instead of focusing on the big real estate communities that or real estate companies that come in and take up our real estate. When it comes to the incarcerated that they've wanted to forget about and throw away, these are my passions, and for the last 2 years I've been involved in these community organizations. I'm an engineer by trade. I'm a Bronx native through life, and what that brings with is the passion that drives me to want to be the change maker of New York. New York has problems with our throwaways. The homelessness in New York is atrocious. We can talk about it, but how many of us here on this panel lived it? I've been homeless before due to the rate increases in our housing units. I've been behind the walls where they want to forget about us. I understand what it takes to try and strive to become better. And now, as an engineer in New York, I've seen the technological mock-up that we have that got us to where we are, and yet, for now, I want to impose that kind of smart living, that platform that says if our technology gets smarter, we get smarter. If our lifestyles get better, or if our lifestyles get better where we can have proper food and nutrition to our kids, then our kids can have a better future. A better future now starts with action now.
Just a reminder, the intros are 3 minutes, but the closing statements will be 5 minutes, so don't feel like you're being rushed. Next we'll go to Mr. Commey, sitting at the end.
How many people know the one thing it takes to make everyone happy? Quick show of hands. Does anybody know the one thing it takes to make everybody happy?
Marijuana, right?
Fact is, you can tell right now from the answers, there's not one thing. There's different answers.
Yes.
There's not just one thing that it takes to make everybody happy. And New Yorkers are struggling to find happiness right now. That's why I'm running. Because I know what it is to struggle. I've struggled through my childhood. I've struggled through my adult life. I've ran into problems with the criminal justice system. And I know that struggle is essential to making a solution. There's so many people in New York that are struggling, and I have ideas. I want to tackle these areas to help people find solutions so that they can stop struggling. Yes. I want to attack education, the education deficiencies, because it shouldn't take 13 years to train kids to get a job at Dwayne Reed or McDonald's. Yes. We need to address the balance between public safety and civil liberties. Yes. It's a struggle, but that's what we have to do. We have to look and find a balance to keep both of these things in mind. And we need to struggle to find out what to do about transit, because people are coming in, trying to get to work, trying to get into the city, get out. It's a struggle, but we need to find solutions, long-term smart solutions that will help make people's lives better and help New Yorkers be happy. That's why I'm running, and that's why I want you to support me on November 7th. Yeah.
Move to Mr. Gangi.
Thank you. Thank you to the New York City Political Forum for holding this event, and I'm pleased to be a part of it. I was born and raised in Brooklyn, lived in New York City all my life, love New York City, want the best for New York City, particularly in terms of social and racial justice. Voted for de Blasio in 2013 with a fair amount of hope and encouragement that he would follow through on his commitments to address the Tale of Two Cities, to make serious progress in eliminating the social, racial, and economic inequities that plague our city. Well, he has failed miserably on a number of fronts, and it's for that reason the enormous disappointment in de Blasio and a desire to move forward with New Yorkers across the racial and class spectrum to create a city that is safe, affordable, livable, and just for all New Yorkers. So we have a grand vision, my campaign has a grand vision for the kind of city this should be, and we have very specific proposals for reaching that vision, for achieving that vision. So policing, we will on day one direct the NYPD to end broken windows policing, driven by a quota system. Broken windows policing targets low-income people of color every day who engage in minor infractions, and sometimes the cops targeting people through false arrests and bogus summonses. Again, focusing on minor infractions that have been virtually decriminalized in white communities. It is a blatantly racist police tactic that inflicts harm and hardship on New Yorkers of color, particularly low-income New Yorkers of color, every day. Regarding affordable housing, de Blasio's plan is not providing true affordable housing. It is entirely independent on profit-making real estate developers to provide affordable housing. It provides incentives for them and additional monies for them. They are not the route to achieve affordable housing because their main purpose is to, and this is not a knock on them, the main reason for being on the planet is to make a profit. Our affordable housing plan will rely entirely on neighborhood housing groups who work in particular areas whose purpose for being is to provide housing and services for the low-income people in their communities. Regarding public education, we have learned, it's not hard to learn because there's so much research about it, and it also makes common sense, that the one factor that will improve academic outcomes for all children across race and class lines is small classes. So we make a pledge that the way we will go after, in a determined activist fashion, for improving public education for all the 1.1 million children who go to our public schools is to promote small classes. I see I'm out of time. I have other issues and other initiatives to talk about, and hopefully later on during this discussion I'll be able to. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gangi. Now we'll move to Mr. Tolkin.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us today. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Good. So my name is Mike Tolkin, and I am running as a Democrat in Tuesday's election. And I'm running because we face massive challenges, unprecedented challenges, and we need big ideas. We need fresh new approaches, new ways of doing things within government. But before I get into my plans and why, specifically I'm running, I just want to take a moment to thank my colleagues up here. Being on the campaign trail for about 9 months now, I've gotten to know most of them decently well, and every person on this stage has integrity, a moral constitution that I would say is consistent with my own, knows right from wrong, which unfortunately is something that you have to say these days when you're running for office, and have great ideas. And we're all on the same team here. Yes, we're all running for the same role, but the reality is we're all here to make New York City a better place. And it's unfortunate that our mayor is not engaged in the process, because that's precisely what we need, engagement. If you have people that have amazing ideas for how to fix our mass transit system, or for how to address our challenges with community policing, or who want to close Rikers, or who have great ideas to integrate integrate technology into our infrastructure to make it work more efficiently and more cost effectively, you should be bringing those ideas into government before you're out of office in November. So with that said, not only do I want to thank them, but they've been an inspiration for me personally, and I'm really grateful to be here and be able to talk about our ideas. In terms of my top priority, it's the economy, and it sort of touches on everything. You know, when we talk about the economy, we need to be creating new jobs today. Over half the jobs that exist today are going away within the next 5 to 10 years due to automation and e-commerce and other technology-based solutions that are eating up our jobs. So we have to be investing in new economic ecosystems, in new grants for our creatives so that we can continue to be a cultural beacon for the country. We need to be distributing income more fairly. It is a disgrace that we have 60,000 people sleeping on our streets. It's a disgrace that, you know, when I'm going through the petitioning process, I have no problem finding people to make minimum wage because they have no other way of pulling in an income. And so we have to address that head on. We need to upgrade our city services and infrastructure from our street cleaning to our mass transit system, because in order to cultivate new economic activity, we need to have a strong mass transit system. We need to be preparing our kids through the education system for future jobs, not for the jobs of yesterday or the jobs of today. So we'll get into a lot more of those issues. I know that, you know, Thomas had mentioned there are a number of things that we're going to talk about today, but again, thank you so much for being here, for being engaged.
So we will get started. The first segment will be asking questions to each candidate. So first topic is housing. And the topic of housing is always synonymous with affordability. So let's go with Mr. Albanese. You served in the city council. Before we talk
Don't hold that against me.
Before we talk about your issues and solutions for the housing crisis, can you talk more about how we got here? What's the root problem?
Well, it started under the Bloomberg administration. We started building these luxury towers in many neighborhoods around the city, making the city less affordable. I mean, I've got a number of proposals to build true affordable housing. I was around in the 80s when we built true affordable housing in the Koch administration, Nehemiah houses, where churches got together and the city provided the infrastructure and the land, these nonprofit developers, and they built housing that actually people who lived in those neighborhoods could afford. We've moved away from that, and Bill de Blasio has basically followed the Bloomberg plan and on steroids. He's given the city over to developers, and the developers are running them up all over the city of New York. Our neighborhoods the character of our neighborhoods is being eroded, and people who earn $30,000, $40,000 a year, working folks are being driven into the streets. 30% of the people in homeless shelters actually have jobs, and I've got a couple of proposals. One is I want to pass a Peter tax, a tax on foreign investors who buy luxury property in the city. By the way, 15% of Manhattan luxury real estate is owned by foreign investors, and they just park their money there. The same thing's happening in Brooklyn. So we passed that tax, and they'll continue to invest because Manhattan real estate is so obviously attractive. And we're going to take that money and 1,000 city parcels that we own, and we're going to build 100% affordable housing in those parcels with the money and actually afford within those zip codes. And by the way, I would scrap immediately all of de Blasio's zoning policies, but that are being fought vigorously across the city, from El Barrio to Inwood to Crown Heights to Sunnyside to the North Shore of Staten Island. People are revolting. The only person who doesn't think this is a bad thing is Bill de Blasio. He thinks this is great. Oh, we're building all this affordable housing. The bottom line is he's putting a Band-Aid over hemorrhage. His zoning policies created the problem. I've got a solution. We can build 70,000 permanently affordable units with my plan and scrap all of de Blasio's giveaways to big developers. And we're going to use nonprofit developers. We're not going to use for-profit developers.
Okay, so here's a follow-up question. Regarding the foreign investors tax or the pay the tear tax, what's the projected revenue?
About $1 billion. And there's a bill in the legislature, actually sponsored by Senator Holman here in Manhattan. It would generate about $1 billion in revenue, and you can build a lot of affordable housing for that. There's also the Battery Park City surplus that can be used to be funneled into affordable housing. So there are a number of revenue streams. Here's the problem. We know how to do this. The problem is politics, right? When big developers contribute tens of thousands of dollars to Mayor de Blasio, follow the money. Just follow the money. And the rhetoric doesn't matter. About 65% of his campaign donations as of July were from real estate developers and their lobbies. So you've got to change the political system. Otherwise, we're going to be spinning our wheels here. And common sense solutions that help rural New Yorkers simply won't be adopted because of the corrupt political system. So we have to change that. And I've got an idea to do that. That's not really what's happening now, but I hope we get into political reform.
Yes, that's coming up later on, but just sticking to the topic of housing. So if you're going to tax a foreign investor, but there are a lot of loopholes where LLC could be just shelled by some unknown entity, how would you?
Well, the federal laws are actually being amended so we can pierce those LLCs and figure out who these investors are. We do know from the Financial Times that 15% of Manhattan real estate is owned by foreign developers. Where there's a will, there's a way. We can definitely get that done. I don't think it's that complicated, and I'm committed to doing it. And London just passed the pay-to-tear tax, so did Vancouver. So we're not reinventing the wheel here.
Okay, thank you. Sticking to the topic of real estate and housing, I want to switch over to Mr. Bashner, who is the real estate attorney. And the question is what type of zoning regulation reforms or changes could be implemented to address this issue?
Well, thank you for that question, because there are just so many things that the mayor has tried to change that have created a land rush environment. Basically, when the mayor took office, he put a big sign that said "for sale" on City Hall. And in order to raise money for the campaign to create universal pre-K, he started a thing called Campaign for One New York, and he started soliciting real estate developers for contributions. Real estate developers who were doing business in front of New York City, and they collectively gave him $3 million, in some cases in excess of $100,000, when the maximum that you can give to a mayor in a campaign is only under $5,000. So the first thing that he did was turn the city over to the developers. There was a proposal in the state to end the limitations on how tall buildings should be to reduce what's called the FAR, or floor area ratio, and he supported that. And I, of course, was against that, because the fabric of our neighborhoods determines how we feel about New York, going back to Jane Jacobs and the feel of the neighborhoods, the active street life, the fact that buildings aren't too large, that we protect our light, our air, our parks, and our built environment in New York City. So the first thing for the zoning code is to don't make it worse by allowing even bigger buildings and by selling variances to developers to jam out-of-scale buildings into areas that they don't belong. For example, 432 Park Avenue is a big middle finger near Central Park, sticking up at the rest of New York City. And there are going to be the other 4 fingers of the hand built along 57th Street that are also going to be 1,000+ feet. So what we need to do is to make sure that we close all the loopholes in the zoning code. For example, 432 Park was built much higher than it should have been because there are voids. There are big empty areas every so often, every 5 or 10 floors, big empty areas that serve no purpose at all, except that they allow you to build taller than you would otherwise. Similarly, there are bulkheads on the roofs of buildings that block our view and create problems with our light and air, that don't count for purposes of the zoning code and building code because they're not occupiable space. So we need to tighten up the loopholes. We need to not allow transferable development rights to be used across many properties in a sort of zigzag pattern to build much bigger buildings than should have been allowed. And we need to make sure that the zoning code protects the built environment that we have. In Park Slope, we downzoned the area because we wanted to make sure that no out-of-scale development was going to occur on the side streets. And we also were working for landmark preservation and to expand the landmark zones so that we don't change what makes New York, New York.
Okay. And just to follow up on that, anytime when you're in a dense urban area, you're vying for limited space, so the issue of air rights comes into play. Do you have one position or another on that issue?
Well, the purpose of air rights originally was to allow certain properties that maybe couldn't be built on or shouldn't be built on because they were landmarks to transfer their air rights to a neighboring property. We have gotten so far afield from that concept because what people do is cobble together a series of properties so that a property way over here is linked lightly to a property over here, and suddenly we have a big building over here. It doesn't make any sense. And the mayor's Midtown rezoning proposal, in which he tries to recapture a portion of the air rights expense for the city, is a one-shot deal that doesn't help us over time. So I think we need to cut back on the air rights transferability, and I think we need to keep zoning contextual, and the buildings need to fit into their neighborhoods. Because the other thing that happens is when we build huge luxury buildings, as Sal was just saying, we create a situation in which we create gentrification, we drive people out of the surrounding neighborhood, we create displacement, we add to homelessness, and we make New York less affordable.
Okay. Sticking on the issue of housing, Mr. Commey, you're running on a libertarian ticket. So why not just have a free market solution to the housing crisis?
Well, when you take a look at the rents in New York and you compare them to other rents around the country, it's ridiculous how much people are being charged for rent.
Yeah.
And it makes no sense. The issue presently this year, under the current plan, approximately 43% of the affordable housing went to people who were low income. So that means over 50% was going to people who are middle and moderate income wage earners. This problem is far bigger than we realize, and so there's not going to be one simple solution that is magically going to provide affordable housing for everybody. It's going to be complex, and there will need to be we will need to address it at various areas. One area to address is NYCHA. My plan is to basically to close NYCHA down by giving the apartments, by giving the current residents in NYCHA the opportunity to own their apartments. This will allow them the opportunity to end the cycle of poverty and to provide a future for their families.
Okay, so sticking with that concept of privatizing NYCHA, so then wouldn't there be less supply of subsidized housing? How would you address that issue?
Well, by allowing, that's just part of the plan. In other words, that's to allow those individuals that are currently at the lowest level of income to get out of poverty. Because right now, what we see is individuals who are spending generations in public housing. That's a problem. If there shouldn't be generation after generation still in public housing, so we can address part of the problem by giving these individuals a chance to own their apartments, gain equity, sell, and then we can start addressing other areas as well.
So it sounds like what you're proposing is like a first right of refusal type of an option as a tenant?
Well, I want them to have the opportunity to own their apartment. Yeah.
All right, we'll move on to the next topic. Another crisis that we have in the city, not as glamorous as housing, but we all go through it, which is transit. We have a mass transit crisis, and let's start with Mr. Tolkin. So explain how some of your initiatives could address the current transit crisis as we know it.
Sure. So we're proposing what we call NYC Ways, which will be a reimagining of our entire transportation system. So the first piece of it is a $25 billion capital improvement program. We're going to repair, upgrade, and expand our subways and mass transit system. We're going to have new cars, more reliable, faster service. We're going to have new tracks, new signals, new stations with air conditioning and heat. So a full end-to-end upgrade. And again, this is an investment in our economy, because when we have a strong mass transit system, it has long-term effects in terms of economic growth and the ability for people to move around the city. So it's not just a quality of life issue, it's an economic development issue. The second piece of it is that we need to be developing entirely new modes of transportation. Part of that is embracing new technology. Part of that is embracing best practices from the private sector. So by way of example, Uber and Lyft and others have created really, I'm sure many of you are familiar with it, and it's awful. It doesn't work well. They don't have any sort of technology or data systems. So we're going to completely abolish Access-a-Ride, and we're going to develop our own version of Uber, which is going to be called NYC Rides, and it will be priced lower than the competition because we don't need to make a profit. We are not we're going to have a for-profit company, but again, the profit comes right back to New York City. Every dollar in profit, I know that we'll probably have the opportunity to talk about this later. One of our big initiatives is called NYC Enterprises, which are for the public good, but they're for profit. So they participate in the private sector and they compete in the private sector alongside other private sector companies, but these companies are ours. So every dollar in profit comes back to fund our mass transit system, our schools, our parks, our health programs. For the first time ever, we will have a source of funding that's not tax-based. And the reason why that's important is because I'm kind of done waiting for rich people to pay for our stuff. Like, we need the opportunity to say, we're not waiting around for somebody to be taxed or for, Albany to get their act together. We're going to propose a comprehensive plan. We're going to have our own source of funding. We're going to work with the governor to transition control from Albany to New York, and we're going to finally have control over our own mass transit system.
Okay, thank you. And speaking of transitioning from Albany to New York, the next question is for Mr. Gangi. You're very critical of this administration, yet when it comes to the transit issues, this mayor seems to kind of kick the can down the road, so to speak, and blame it on the governor because obviously MTA is under the purview of the state. What kind of leadership role should a mayor play in addressing the mass transit crisis that we have right now?
This question for me?
Yes.
Yeah, well, the way de Blasio has handled the subway crisis is all too typical of his style of leadership, which is, as often as he can, he makes a political calculation and then he punts. He's done that on the statues issues. He did that on Rikers, where he came up with a cockamamie plan that the city would close Rikers in 10 years, and he won't, even if he's reelected, he won't be mayor for 5 years before 2027 when that pledge comes in. We'll close, and we pledge to close Rikers next year. But so his style of leadership regarding the problems with the subways is to try to make it as clear as possible to the public that he's not at fault, that he's not responsible for the breakdowns in the subways, for the poor conditions in the subways, for the fact that so many people are now being late for appointments, being late to show up for work. My view is, and this is the attitude I would adopt as a mayor, I am mayor of New York City. I am responsible for the subways. The subways are a critical part of the day-to-day life of New York City, so I have to step up and take responsibility for improving those services. Recognizing from a practical standpoint that obviously the governor and the state has control over appointing a majority of the members of the MTA, so we have to work with the governor. So, and with the state legislature. So, a couple of things that I would do, and I would have done if I had been mayor, is first of all, I would ride the subways regularly. As you guys might know, de Blasio has not ridden the subway, had not ridden the subway for 3 years until it became a crisis, and then he tried to make a public display of the fact that now he's taking the subway. The other thing is, I would work with my people and with experts to come up with a very concrete plan for improving the subways. And it would involve, as Sal Albanese pointed out, there's a deep need to upgrade the signaling system in the subways because it's old and it's decaying and it's dilapidated. There's a need to have new subway cars. There's a need to have new buses. What I would do is commit the city for paying for a significant portion of fixing the signal system and providing for new trains and new buses. And I would announce that plan, not in a way that attacks the governor and tries to put the blame on him, but basically coming forward and saying, these are the things that we think that need to be done. I know that you have some ideas too, and probably we share what some of those ideas are, and let's work together to make it happen. Another thing I would do is provide for free fare for low-income New Yorkers. Right now, on our subways and buses, right now, fare evasion is the second most common arrest by the NYPD. It's a form of broken windows policing on our subways. It really significantly affects the quality of life and denigrates the quality of life for low-income people who take our subways because there's such a large police presence. The city spends over $50 million a year on these arrests. And what we would do is, first of all, decriminalize fare evasion, order the cops not to be arresting or ticketing people for fare evasion, provide free fares for poor people so that poor people can get on the subways without fear of being arrested and harassed, can get the jobs, get the job interviews, get the child care. One other thing we would do is we will initiate public works projects in our city that would be primarily aimed at hiring unemployed and underemployed young people from our major cities, pay them a livable wage, and then have them work for various government agencies, improving our parks, improving our roads, and cleaning up and fixing our subways.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Gangi. And sticking on the subject of mass transit, Mr. Browder. As a Bronx native, there are many underserved areas in the outer boroughs. Somebody already mentioned these transit deserts. So the question is, how would you improve service? And before I direct a question at you, it seems like sometimes when you cut off service in one area, then the other side benefits from it, so it's almost like a zero-sum game. So the question is, how can you improve service without compromising another district or neighborhood?
Thank you. Actually, just to start off with, as our colleague Michael Tolkin had spoke on, we are colleagues in one and the same. We do want what's best for New York, all in one together. So they are not our enemies. However, we are not, as a Green Party, we've seen Democrats and Republicans and what they can do to New York and our country, period. We are not, I am not a Green Party member. I am a Green Party member. I am not a Democrat or Republican. So we do need new thoughts and new ways of doing things. One, our city's public transportation system is run off old system lines that pollute our system, pollute our people. So by walking by living underneath these train systems in the Bronx, what we realize is there's mercury that falls off these trains. Our quality of life is actually under an impedance all the time. And so what we do not need is new ways to start killing off our people. And when I mean our people, our poor black and brown skinned people who are desperately trying to get out of our communities, and yet we stay in our communities because there's no way to move out, because the system of living or the cost of living is too high. What we are trying to do, which it won't be enough time to talk on this platform, but you can go to our website, greenparty.org, is changing our system of public transportation to more greener, efficient, and quality systems of transportation, which is actually the systems that we can build is this new as what we have in the train in our airports, the speed on the light rail and the long distance travel systems where we're not impeding in our quality of health and our lifestyle. What de Blasio has to realize, or the next mayor, which I will realize and acknowledge, is when we have a relationship with the governor, it's not to pit New York City against each other. When our people shouldn't be lessened in what we should get so that we can appease either side. I mean, New Yorkers should come first. We live in New York, and yet our governor isn't the enemy, yet it isn't feasible for us to continue doing the same things over and over, expecting different results.
Thank you.
Speaking on one more thing, actually, when we're talking about arrest for our poor community, we shouldn't actually be criminalizing for something that the government, which we pay into. It's not something that they're giving us for free. Our people, we pay taxes for these systems of transportation or living lifestyles. These should be paying us back. And yet they make more money off of us by putting us, our black and brown skinned bodies. Where were y'all actually when in your field, speaking up for our communities, in the black and brown skinned communities that get arrested for these minuscule crimes, but by trying to get to work on time or trying to get to our interviews or to our loved ones, we can't get out of our communities if we can't pay the increase of $275 all the time.
And we're going to get to that later on. We'll talk about criminal justice reforms. I know closing down Rikers is one of the hot topics. We'll certainly get to all that, but right now we're going to move on to the next segment, which is called Crossfire, starting with Mr. Commey. And this segment, each candidate could ask a question to another candidate, their fellow colleagues. So let's start with Mr. Commey. You could direct a question at any of the candidates sitting at the table.
We shouldn't ask questions of all the candidates. It should be one candidate that we.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay.
At this point, I want to ask Mr. Browder to expound upon what he was talking about in terms of addressing criminal justice, and particularly in terms of what your ideas of reforming criminal justice look like.
Thank you. And actually, what the Green Party is not looking to do is criminalize our people no further. What, on a social standpoint, our jails are meant for, one, innocent until proven guilty. That's that is the stance of being an American citizen in New York, innocent until proven guilty. So what we're looking to do is, one, that like Gangi said, shutting down Rikers shouldn't take, first of all, numerous years, 10 years to shut down. What I came out with back in the summer of this year was a 3-year plan, which we could do in 3 months. But realistically, shutting down Rikers Island is one jail. It's not every jail. Shutting down Rikers does not commit to helping out New York City when we're paying over $250,000 per person in these systems. And then on top of that, opening up new jails isn't an alternative to correcting the issue. Correcting the issue, which we have the name corrections, really comes when you start to look at, one, reevaluating the people that are in Rikers or in any of these facilities. Rikers has a population of 68% of the population are mentally ill, or at least deemed mentally ill. We have facilities that are not even at 17% at full or 17% capacity. That means there's a lot of room for people to go there to get the proper help they need, so that they can be corrected in their behaviors. So that's 68%. We have another 20% of the population that then are criminalized for minimal crimes, and it's not even, it's most of the time it's violations, open canisters, hopping to train stations, stuff like that, sleeping in the trains, sleeping in public park. This is not something that takes someone's job or life away from, because then they go into these facilities where they end up dying or end up like my brother, who didn't need to be there in the first place with Khalif, the story of Khalif, my brother. So small crimes like that, 20% of the population should be released immediately. You're innocent until proven guilty, not the other way around, and not supposed to be coached into getting a plea bargain. The other percent of the population, where we have jails already instituted in our city, that's 12% of the population that have violent alleged crimes. That's where they can go. This is how we shut down and then start rearing the money into our communities. This money that we've been dedicating towards places like Rikers, not just Rikers alone, but places like Rikers can be eliminated if we start being transparent with our funds. I sit on New York City's Department of Finance Committee since 2015, while my brother was in jail. They cannot lie to me about where our funds go. Why do we have a surplus of over $67 million sitting for a rainy day? We need to start dedicating that money and being transparent of where our money goes. Thank you.
Okay, so here's a follow-up question. By most estimations, there's approximately 8,000 to 10,000 inmates in Rikers. So if your plan calls for a 3-year drawdown,
that is a lie, actually. De Blasio put out that lie so that you can think that he's been decreasing the population, and other lobbyist companies help with that lie. Actually, there's 120,000 people that circulate through Rikers Island. So the numbers are skewed because they tell you half the truth. The real truth is 120,000 people circumvent through Rikers Island. And that's whether they stay for a week, 3 weeks, a month. Why are we incarcerating that or locking up, detaining people that are innocent that many times a year, or that many people of our people affected?
okay, so if we go by your numbers or figures of 120,000 more or less.
It's stated in the Department of Corrections. You can actually look at it.
Okay, and if the drawdown is 3 years, then where would you put those former inmates? Where would they go?
So, correction, they're not inmates. Inmates are entitled for people who are actually, 1, sentenced, or 2, took a plea. Second, that's what we have to do. We have to start educating our people and being transparent with even our verbiage. These people are detainees. If I lie or if I say someone did something, if it really is something that happened, these people can be evaluated. One, I put out the first law to give us our constitutional right to have a speedy trial. That law, since we don't have a speedy trial in New York, which is our constitutional right, this is what I will constantly fight for until our kids, our mothers, our fathers, and our parents are free from places that hold us with unlimited time. Only New York State does this. No other state. We all have a system of speedy trial. Texas State is the only state that actually has a constitutional right to have a speedy trial. What I would do with them is, have enough legal defenders, whether it's Bronx defenders or Brooklyn defenders, work with these organizations so that they can finally have the enough manpower to look at each case individually before bringing it to court. But second, stop. Our communities are flooded with police officers. The thought that we have to have 1 officer or 3 officers per person in New York City is insane. We have to bring back stronger values in our communities to have community policing police our communities. Grandma in the building used to be the police officer. Now it's officers, and people are too afraid to address issues.
Okay, we're gonna move on down the row here, and the next person that's up is Mr. Bashner for Crossfire.
My question is for Sal. Sal, the other night I thought I heard you say in a debate that you had some concerns about the Ferguson effect, that, and don't let me put words in your mouth, but that having greater scrutiny for the actions of police officers could inhibit policing. And so I just wanted to ask you to clarify that and ask your position on oversight of police who misbehave.
Well, police who misbehave shouldn't be on the job. They should be fired. Professional policing is what we.
I think you turned it off.
Is it okay? Any police officer who misbehaves should be fired, obviously, and we want professional policing. Police officers have to be, obviously, we're not going to accept racist behavior, brutal behavior, and I think the police department in New York City has made major changes. When I was a council member back in the 80s, the police force was predominantly white. Now it's majority minority, which is great.
We're the majority, not minority.
Sorry?
Population statistics show that we are the majority, not minority.
everybody's minority now, I guess.
No, we're not.
But moving on, I think we've made a lot of progress in that area, and the cops in New York City, I believe, do a very good job. There are a couple of folks, obviously, should be on the job. I was a school teacher for 11 years. We had most of the teachers were great, and a few of the teachers shouldn't have been on the job. I mean, that goes with every profession. Obviously, with policing, we've got a tremendous amount of oversight in the city. We have the CCRD, we have the Internal Affairs Bureau of the Police Department, we have an Inspector General now, we have a monitor, federal monitor, that oversees New York City police officers. So there are plenty of oversight over the New York City police officers, and I think, generally speaking, they do a pretty decent job.
And while you got the mic, Mr. Albanese, you get to ask a question.
Yeah, this is for Michael. I respect your knowledge of technology, and you've got quite a background in that area. And many of our city agencies are, let's say, backward. And one of the major agencies that bothers me is the Board of Elections. It's totally archaic. There are all kinds of obstructions and to people's ability to vote, and it's political. It's not professional. And what I'd like to ask you, Michael, is with your background, how do we use technology to provide access to voters so that we can facilitate democracy?
First of all, thank you for that question. We're certainly on the same page with respect to the problems that exist. I think from my perspective, and the way we approach problem solving more broadly, is to get into the weeds of the problem. What is actually wrong with the system? And rather than try to fix the existing system, which is largely broken, there are all these archaic rules, and it's sort of like a tree that just hasn't been pruned in 100 years. We're now going to design a new department and a new system from the ground up that meets the needs of today. So, by way of example, I don't think it's purely a technology approach. I think it's more of an innovation-based approach, where we're looking at what our election systems are designed to do, which is to have everyone's voice represented, and anyone who wants to stand up and run for office and serve the people, give them the opportunity to do so. Anything that gets in the way of either of those two things, we need to break apart and, again, rebuild from the ground up, using technology in certain cases to elevate the voices that have up until this point not been heard. So, by way of example, this is a great forum, and we have had the opportunity to do many of these, and I see that some people are filming, and that's great, and that should be on Facebook. But as a collection of people, as a government, we should be putting together a platform that is centralized so that when people go to learn about their candidates, they learn about everyone. The notion that the Campaign Finance Board is featuring, literally, if you call the Campaign Finance Board and you listen to their hold, when they put you on hold and the music's playing, it's ads for Mr. Stringer, Mr. de Blasio, Ms. James. I mean, yeah.
Sure, yes.
Their ads are playing on the Campaign Finance Board's phone. And so there's a lot that we can do by just having some common sense. But there's also some stuff that we can do in terms of bringing social media and other distribution channels to the people. We can have plenty of online debates. We can engage people in entirely new ways. But our system needs to evolve to allow for it. And the last thing I'll mention is the petitioning process itself is a perfect example of something that's super outdated, where you got to go out in the streets and get 15,000 people to sign a petition. That's not the way that people organize or communicate today. And so that alone is something that we can address really quickly by having online voting, online engagement. You shouldn't just be handed a paper to sign in the street. You should actually have the opportunity to look at a website or to look at a video and to engage with the candidate in an entirely new way.
Yes.
Who hasn't been asked a question? Aaron. So we face massive economic challenges sort of across the board, but with jobs going away and with so many people not well equipped for the jobs of the future, how do we get from where we are today to where we need to be 10 years from now in terms of creating jobs that are high paying, that are sustainable, and that that our people are prepared for?
Yes, definitely. People being able to provide for themselves is a very, very important thing. And when I look at people today, individuals that have been on a job for 40 years, 50 years, struggling, and they're hoping to get a pension. What I realize is that what we want is for people to be able to provide for themselves. We don't necessarily need it to be in the form of jobs, because we run the risk of creating, and I think we're there, of creating a semi-permanent underclass that's at the mercy of the robber baron class. So what I really want to focus on is giving people the skills, and in education, this is one of the things I want to focus on, giving kids the skills of entrepreneurship, of business management, of economics, so that they can get out and not just be workers for somebody else, but they can be employers. They can start businesses, and they can be the bosses, so that they are not at the mercy of somebody else who and just hoping to survive, long enough that Social Security kicks in, or that their pensions aren't, robbed. And so we really need to address education and focus on making people able to have opportunities to create businesses, to do for themselves.
Can I ask, since I haven't been asked the question, can I ask myself? He enjoyed that attempted humor. Thank you. I salute you. So I think Richard hasn't been asked the question, is that right? So a recent issue that's arisen in the city is about how do we deal with, as a city, statues that are offensive, statues that are associated with the Confederacy. Very specifically, there's been a major debate about the Christopher Columbus statue. So how, and what de Blasio has done, and again in typical de Blasio fashion, he's punted, created a commission. Won't tell us what he wants to do with Christopher Columbus. How would you handle it?
Well, the mayor will tell us, but only after the election. There are a lot of things we'll only find out after the election. Look, this is very straightforward. There's a big dispute about all sorts of historical figures. We have hundreds of years of history with a lot of people who did some good things and did some very bad things. When I grew up, Christopher Columbus was an explorer. He was a hero. He discovered the New World. And when my kids came home from school, they said, we're having Indigenous Peoples Day, and Christopher Columbus, we're learning, had slaves, didn't treat people so well. By the way, coming over here to what they later named America, but used to have a different name in different places, maybe that wasn't so good for the people who used to live here. So we have a real teachable moment there. Do we want to take down the statue of Columbus and rename Columbus Circle something else?
Yes.
I don't think so.
Absolutely.
I don't think so. I think that if we took down all of the statues...
Slave owners gotta go.
Right? Okay, so we're going to lose Washington and Jefferson also. And I'm not defending their slave owners. Okay. Certainly I would start by removing all the Confederate statues, because I think the people who took up arms against the United States and behaved in a treasonous manner shouldn't be saluted. I similarly wouldn't have statues to Hitler, or Goering, or Mussolini, or Emperor Hirohito. On the other hand...
Is there a statue of Hitler somewhere in New York City?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of.
Christian.
On the other hand, as New Yorkers,
He's being theoretical, people.
As New Yorkers, we tend to like our built environment, and when people look at Columbus Circle, they're not seeing Columbus, they're seeing there's a big statue, and they don't even know what it's about. So, actually, Sal, your running mate, David Eisenbach, I thought had a very good proposal for historical signage throughout the city to make each of these situations a teachable moment, and to let people know what the alternatives are as to how we look at those histories now in better hindsight from when they were put up. And I think also that we should be putting up more statues to people who are real heroes, who don't have those histories, and who are on the other sides of all of those issues. So I think we can do a lot to address the issue without tearing everything down. You know, there's something about erasing history that's entirely too Soviet for my taste.
They erased our history.
Okay, can we let
Yes.
Mr. Bashner finish? And then we'll get to your next one.
Yes, no, I agree with you that they have, in fact, in many cases. And in fact, many of the Confederate soldiers weren't put up because of the love of Confederacy. It was put up as a way to put a sort of a boot on the throat of the people who have already been discriminated against and were the descendants of slaves. And I'm against that, of course.
Okay, I do want to move on of how this is a citywide race, but it's an example of how national politics kind of trickles down into city politics, and New York City being what it is, being a prominent epicenter of everything, this issue is very important, and I'm sure it'll resurface again after the election. Okay, we will move to Mr. Browder. Your turn to ask a question to any of the candidates.
Thank you. So actually, I am extremely curious as to all of them, and I wish everyone can have a chance to answer it, but as far as the question I want to ask is to Sal Albanese. I'm curious as to what your decision after the election, since after the primary election, what your decision would be to endorsing De Blasio, or not.
That's an easy question. And I didn't endorse him in 2013. I was one of the few Democrats in the city that predicted he'd be a terrible mayor. And of course, I was right. So after the election, I plan on winning the primary, by the way. So I'll see you in the debates in the fall. But I'm also the Reform Party candidate. There's a party that's just formed. It's a small party that centers around political reform, campaign finance reform, lobbying reform. So I was lucky enough to be nominated for that party's mayoralty position. So I'll be running whether I win or lose the primary into November. So I have no plans. Of endorsing De Blasio because, as I said, I think he's a failed mayor.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to move on to the next segment, which is the town hall segment, where any of the audience members could ask a question to any of the candidates. There's a microphone standing right over there, so we kindly ask that one person at a time come up. If you want to form a line, that's fine. And the only other stipulation is it's going to be in the form of question. We're not here to make a rhetorical statement or any other nuance type statements. A direct question, and only to one candidate at a time, please. So, we'll start with Eleanor. Go ahead.
I didn't know that it was going to be just for one candidate.
One candidate, please.
Okay, well, I will ask the candidates to choose who wishes.
You have to ask a question to one candidate. That's the format. We could come back to you, and maybe
Yes.
we'll take the rest, and we'll go to the next person in line. Go ahead, sir.
Our public school system of education.
And the question is directed at whom?
Let's see. The gentleman there's the top.
Okay.
Are you familiar with our public school system?
Yes.
Okay. Do you feel that De Blasio has broken state law in regards to our system of school governance? and how would you go about fixing it?
So I don't know about having broken state law, but what I would say is that we need to revamp our entire education system. So we're proposing a plan that we call NYC Talent. In fact, we unveiled a little bit of that earlier today. There's a video that you can see online. But essentially, we need to be restructuring our curriculum to prepare our kids for future jobs. And what that means is we need to be teaching them less about how to think, less about what to think and more about how to think. We need to teach them skills like collaboration, creativity, problem solving, critical thinking. We need to be building vocational programs into our pre-K-12 system so that kids coming out of high school have a skill set that's immediately marketable in the job marketplace. So by way of example, if you are passionate about film and you want to be a filmmaker, you should be able to pursue that in the K-12 system. If you want to be a chef, guess what? That's a job that's not going away. People love food and people need food. So why aren't we creating more chefs? We have plenty of empty storefronts that could be really awesome restaurants if we had, a little bit more, rent aside, because we have to solve that problem too. But we also need to prepare an army of next generation professionals. And so the last piece of it that I want to highlight is also restructuring our schools so that they look less like prison cells and more like the modern workplace. Collaborative workspaces, the latest and greatest technology, new ways to frame a problem and to solve collaboratively. This is how the modern workplace works, and that's how our schools should work.
And just a quick follow-up, how would something like a charter school play a role in your reform measures?
So charter schools, in theory, are really great in that they encourage experimentation and testing. The problem is that there's no comprehensive plan to identify best practices or even to experiment in any sort of coordinated or comprehensive way. And so the way to view our NYC Talent program is basically like one big charter school where every school is experimenting. Every teacher is empowered to take risks and to evolve the way they teach. And every single school benefits from best practices as we identify them.
Okay, thank you. Next up is Eleanor.
Okay, I'm going to ask Akeem Browder of the Green Party about infrastructure and what you do about it, and I'd like you to focus on 3 particular issues. How are we going to deal with the threat of hurricanes and extreme weather? How are we going to deal with it if one of the 2 water tunnels gets broken and half of the city's without water before the 3rd one's built? Other people have mentioned about the mass transit system, Accessorite. If you're not in a wheelchair, they decide that you're healthy. The elevators are broken.
Okay, let's just deal with one question at a time. So can you address the question about how to deal with natural disasters?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Eleanor. For that question in regards to hurricanes and sewers, so one, I'm going to push this back. One, the way that we go about handling natural disasters in New York currently is by telling people to stay inside, and we scare people to buy things as far as going to Walmart and buying your week's savings away for light bulbs, toilet paper, and all that stuff. That's not actually adequate into what we're dealing with. It takes preparation. So infrastructure is planning and getting New York to a point where we can understand that one, our natural resources is to be taken advantage of, not run away from, so that we can get other things like economy. When we focus on economy and not people and not lives, then we build better with corporations. And who owns these corporations? The 1%ers. We don't have that kind of luxury to keep on jeopardizing our communities so that we can have the corporations benefit. So what I'd like to see happen is when we fix our sewer systems with those that we throw away, meaning New York has a passion of throwing away the non-wanted or the unwanted, the previously incarcerated and those that are homeless. Yet by giving jobs to everyone and making it something where Mike Tolkin has a better decision for what for who we care about, New Yorkers. New Yorkers has the ability to put everyone to work. We have issues when it comes to cleaning our sewer systems, which you had asked about, and yet we don't because we can't find the resources for it. Yet we do have the resources or the financial capacity to put everyone to work for a better New York.
Okay, thank you. Now we have to move on.
About the sewer system.
No, sorry, we got to move on. There's 10 people behind you. Okay, next please.
Hi, my name is Sue, and this is a question to Mr. Tolkin. Oh, okay. I've studied how real estate developers fund their new buildings. They fund them with huge commercial loans from commercial banks. Many of them, the too big to fail banks, such as JP Morgan Chase and Citibank. I've also studied the process of how New York's infrastructure development is funded. It's funded by huge loans from those same banks that put the city more and more into debt.
Yes.
Why are we not talking about the banks?
In what sense? Sorry. When you say why are we not talking about the banks, in terms of
The power they have over our city and what we're able to do.
So I think it's a great point, and thank you for the question. It's one of the reasons why I think it's so important that we begin to develop businesses in the private sector on behalf of the people. The only way to counterbalance private sector interests in the larger banks is to have the people have their own version of it. And so we've seen the private sector take over a lot of the functions of government over the course of the last several decades. Now we need to balance that back out. And I'm not one of these people that says it's the public sector versus the private sector, but rather we need to be working more collaboratively together. So NYC Enterprises are for-profit companies that are for the public good that New York City owns. We'll have our own bank. We'll have our own development arm so that we're not needing to subcontract out to private enterprise that has a profit motive. So you're 100% right that we need to be getting to the root cause of the economic inequity, and it's not just because certain populations have been held back and because there's been discrimination over the course of generations, but it's also because there's so many entrenched financial interests that we need to break down.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Brooks Serra Guzman, New York City resident since 1992, in Inwood Terrace to be precise. I'm a proud transsexual woman, and I have seen how it breaks my heart every year to see the Gender Expression Non-Discrimination Act just gets snubbed, and blaming Ruben Diaz Sr., blaming everybody, but they managed to keep transsexual women out of sight and out of mind. And when they happen to include a transsexual woman, she's white.
Can we get to the question?
Yes, I'm getting there, and it's gonna be for Mr. Albanese. I beg your patience because I'm the only transsexual woman here, and you're all cis people. So I need to set it up good, and unfortunately you broke my train of thought. So please don't do that again.
Well, in the interest of time.
In the interest of time, sir,
if you
black transsexual women are getting killed and murdered.
Okay,
they have to sell their body to survive, engage in survival sex. So I beg your pardon, please don't shut me up. This is very important. I am here, it takes a lot out of me to come here. And I always be ostracized, people talking shit about me all the time. And now they want to put Brad Holman to sponsor gender, a white gay man. gay men don't give us a break.
You got it. Let Mr.
This is
Albanese respond.
homocentrism. So I don't want to depend on gender. So how are we going to rescue us? We are the only minority forgotten, left behind. The only minority has not made any progress. How are you going to save my black transsexual women without the whole transgender spectrum? I want to focus on black transsexual women.
I commend you for your courage, transsexual women of color obviously should be part of any human rights bill, and we know why Albany hasn't passed it, because unfortunately the Senate is Republican, unfortunately, and they tend to have conservative, quote, conservative values, and I think that we're going to eventually break through, and I think that you've got to stay strong. I mean, certainly, I think up here, everybody supports your efforts here. I don't think there's...
We need a community center. We're homeless.
Yes. I mean, that should be part and parcel of any, and we can do that, by the way, in the city. The mayor can do that. Certainly, there's still obviously a lot of bias out there. We've seen a number of incidents where transsexual women have been beaten up, and I listen. I know full well how tough that issue is, because in 1986 I was one of the swing votes to pass the first gay rights bill in New York City, and I represent a very conservative district. I had to have bodyguards for 2 days, and I had to leave my house. Actually, there were pickets around my home. We've come a...
If you think it's a good, productive way to, you know.
You must have watched the debate the other night.
No, I
answered that question. I was a school teacher for 11 years. We had a bird's eye view of our public schools. I was also a public school student, and both of my daughters went to public schools. I'm not a big fan of standardized testing. I'm not a big fan of teaching to the test, and we need, young people have to be excited about coming to school buildings. And what we've done now is we've made it a drudgery, because you have teachers teaching to the test. You have kids that have become test takers. We want them to be innovative. We want them to be thinkers, entrepreneurs, and what we're doing is we're producing good test takers. And tests could be used for diagnostic purposes to analyze what areas kids need more help in. But high stakes testing is overtaking our society and our public schools. And as mayor, I'm going to reduce reliance on standardized testing. I call it high stakes testing. And it's going to help the teachers and the kids.
Thank you.
Just a quick follow-up. Which subject did you teach when you were a school teacher?
Well, I actually taught a number of subjects. Really, I worked for 5 years in a junior high school where we had kids who were not able to function in the mainstream. So there were 2 of us, 2 teachers, and 3 paraprofessionals. And we taught them math, English, science. This is before special education, and many junior high schools had academy classes, and I was one of the teachers. But my license was in health and physical education. I coached high school gymnastics for 5 years in high school, and I also was on special assignment for 5 years in a junior high school, and we had serious gang and drug problems in the city in the 80s, in the 70s actually, and I worked with youth gangs, I worked with kids who were experimenting with drugs, so I did a number of things within the public school system, which gives me a real broad overview of the system, so when I become mayor, I'll actually know what I'm talking about.
Okay, next question, please.
Hi, I'm not sure who to ask this to. I am a member of the Green Party, so I really want to ask Akeem questions, but I think it would make more sense to ask, and I don't know your name.
Richard Bashner.
Richard Bashner. Are you a Democrat?
I am.
Okay, so most of the people on this panel are Democrats. I want to ask you, you had said earlier that everyone on this panel is a really good person and has good ideas, and I agree with that. You all are. But I think you're all in the wrong party. And the problem is that I want to ask you, do you really think in this day and age that the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, that it's so corrupt from start to finish? It's a pay-to-play system, and even if you start out as good as you all are, you will not end up good when you become a Democrat and you live in that system, because that system eats good people up. And that's why I think you all should leave the Democratic Party and come into the Green Party, because we need you. And so really my question is, how do you plan to stay honest in a corrupt system, in a corrupt party, in a corrupt country?
Thank you. I really love that question. What you're saying is, how does anyone who's interested in changing the world not lose their soul? Right?
In the Democratic Party.
In the Democratic Party, or the Republican Party for that matter. I spent a lot of time in my introductory remarks not talking about policy, but talking about who I am and where I come from. What I'd like to tell you is, if you know where you came from, and you know why you're in it, then there's not a question. I don't owe anything to anybody. Before I entered this race on May 15th, I had never taken a political contribution of any kind. I had made limited political contributions to people who I thought were going to change the world for the better, like Barack Obama. And you may not be a fan, but I am. And I'll stick with that, especially given the contrast with our current president. In terms of the Green Party, I'm as green as it gets, I have to tell you, because I'm one of the few people who's actually talking about a carbon tax on residential and commercial buildings and putting the money back into mass transit, because we have an ecological disaster that's on a rolling basis right now with Hurricane Harvey, Hurricane Irma, and I don't know what the next few letters in the alphabet are, but I'm not looking forward to them. And we know from Hurricane Sandy, which was a much smaller storm with the storm surges, that we're in for a rough future, and we're going to have rising tides, and we're going to have storm surges, and we're going to have global warming and more extreme weather, and we need to do something about it right now. We need to not go to Germany and talk about the Paris Accords and run away from the city. We need to talk about right here, right now, what can we do to do our part? And one thing is a carbon tax. Another thing is congestion pricing, to reduce the over-reliance on the automobile and to put the drivers on the same footing as the subway riders. So I've been saying, it seems like just plain old common sense to me, that every time you cross a bridge to get to Manhattan, you should pay $2.75. Why? Because the subway costs $2.75. And why do we subsidize the cars and not mass transit? So we take that money, we plow that back into mass transit. I'd also like to see virtually every office building and city building.
Okay, we do.
How do I not lose my soul?
You can't stay honest in a corrupt party. That's my point.
I volunteered at Brooklyn Community Board 6 for 18 years. I haven't made a penny from it. I go every month to meetings, 3-4 meetings a month, plus the executive committee stuff. I do it because I care. I do it because I'm concerned. And I'm not changing my stripes next week, regardless of what party I'm in. I'm running in the Democratic Party because the Democrats are about 70% or more of the registered voters in New York. And if you want to win the nomination...
That's because they make everyone Democrat or Republican.
I'm not...
Teach the whole thing and not have.
We do have to move on.
I'm just telling you why I'm running as a Democrat. I'm a lifelong Democrat.
You've made majority purposely.
Next question, please.
My name is Jack Baldwin. I'm from Manhattan. I like to say I'm a former everything, including a teacher in the public school system. I know about the public school system. I protested the transit system. I protested the housing.
We have to get to the question, please.
And they're all a mess. And I will get to the question. And it's related to this, what I'm saying. And my question is for Mr. Browder. As has just been said, everyone here believes, everyone on the platform believes in social justice. Everyone says that they believe in ecological sustainability. And the Greens also say they believe in social justice and ecological sustainability. So what, in your opinion, Mr. Browder, is the paradigm change that distinguishes the Green Party from the Democrats on those issues?
Thank you for asking that, and that helps us get to the point of what a Green Party stands for and what our politics are as a Green Party. As in my candidacy, our team and the Green Party is in need, New York is in need of a change, and that change does come from one ecological difference where we're not just taking on the same thing, which is looking forward to another 4 years of mass transit, taking advantage of our kids and basically of all our community members, and then the government advancing on that by putting them in jail for doing small crimes. What I'm looking to do in our school system is bring back parenting to the community involvement in our schools. Our school districts need to have more, in our community boards, we need more of the CPLs, the community parenting boards that is taken out of our communities or taken out of the school system, so that the communities don't have a hand in what our kids are learning or how our kids are getting the proper education that's necessary. Also, when it comes to the homeless shelters, we've suffered in 2015, although de Blasio was set on track to add new development for homeless shelters, which is not a good thing because we're not looking to make permanent housing out of temporary housing, and yet he stopped that as well, which I want to make sure no one has to live on the streets, or also no one has to live in temporary housing for long term. What we had is so far de Blasio giving and I hate to give name recognition to this guy, but realistically he's given this statement that he's brought 5,000 or kept 5,000 more people into the homeless system, and yet that is temporary. Temporary housing shouldn't be more than 6 months. We have to get them to a point where people are living in housing that's permanent and not decrepit old facilities, where we have only one homeless shelter for children in New York City, which houses 5,500 beds, and then these kids have to sit on the streets or the trains, and then go into the Department of Corrections because they're sleeping in the trains, and then the judge gives housing order or housing orders so that they can't go back home, and now they're more homeless and they're criminalized for it. We do have problems in our city, and yet the Green Party, and I'll finish out now, our Green Party platform, which you can look, as I said, on GP or greenparty.org, will show more of what we haven't been able to do for the last 45 years or ever, because we don't have a platform for Green Party to be in New York City. We have only kids and people growing up knowing democracy and thinking Democrats stand for democracy. Everyone stands for democracy, or what the theory is. It's time to have a difference and have Green Party show what that means.
Okay, next question, please. And we're in the final stretch, so please direct your questions quickly. I'm not here to shut anyone down, but there's at least half a dozen people waiting very patiently, so go ahead, sir.
Sure. My question is directed towards Mr. Bashner. From 1847 until 1976, the City University of New York, the public college system for New York City, was free. Are you going to push for CUNY to go back to being free?
I would love for CUNY to go back to being free. My father-in-law came to this country when he was, I guess, 8 or 9 years old in the late 1930s, escaped from Germany just in time, and he went to New York City public schools, he went to CUNY, he wound up becoming a doctor or pediatrician, and that was a real opportunity for him to make his way in the world. He was able to do that. We need to extend that to all of the kids in New York City. I don't know if I would make it free for everybody. I'd certainly make it free for any New York City high school graduates, because I think we need to have a pipeline for our kids to succeed and know that they have a place waiting for them, so that we give them an incentive to study in high school, to work hard, and to achieve, so that they know they have a future ahead of themselves. So I think that we need to address not only the tuition, but we also need to make additional money available to them to cover the other expenses, like housing and school supplies and food. So I think we should have a robust work-study program in which kids find jobs and we give them some money as they're working. I did that. It builds character and it helps you get through school and prepares you for later life working in internships as well. So the short answer is yes.
Hi. So I wish I had 2 questions so I could ask Mike about socialism, but I'm not going to because I'm going to direct my question to Akeem. And I'm so sorry about your brother. And I was just wondering if you can talk to us a little bit more on your stance on decarceration, restorative justice, and given not just the increased militarization of policing, but its very founding and history and relationship to slavery in this country, alternatives to policing.
Thank you. When it comes to community policing, I believe that we need what we could have. One, we're trying to build, or what Ponte had stated in a forum that I went to in 2015. That they want to get to a point where we can get police and communities in a better place, and technology is the way to do that, and that's a bold-faced lie. One, the police has earned our distrust in New York City, in our communities that are being constantly either incarcerated for minuscule crimes or for alleged incidents that are flabbergasted at most. And when we see that, then we obviously have communities that are being targeted. And so when these communities are targeted, you have fear in the communities. Not just fear from your community members, but fear from the police who are I'd like to ask an officer if they were here, but anyone that knows a police officer should ask, are you first a defender of your community, or are you taking the stance on being an attack dog? Are you military? In that case, they're supposed to be here for our protection. They're supposed to be here to protect and serve, and yet obviously we don't have that kind of jurisdiction because they're being run by a corrupt system that doesn't have accountability. And that's where I want to get to New York to. Accountability for everyone, not just officers, but accountability for judges, accountability for our lawmakers like our senators and mayors who get paid to serve us, and yet they get paid more than us. And yet you're servants of the law. You're servants of our community. And yet I've never heard of a servant that actually that gets away with wrongdoing. But in this day and age, we have that. So what I'm looking to do is, when I've been working with community legislative offices, our assembly members, especially in the Bronx, because I'm from the Bronx, but I've been working in Brooklyn with our assembly members and council members, where laws that are in place should be laws for all, not laws for those that can afford. So shutting down our bail systems is the first thing that we have to start with, because it's a for-profit on our human lives, and it has no place in a humanistic world. We don't live on the fact that everyone can afford what their rights. We have a system where it's constitutionally right that we have a right for speedy trial, or a right to have ourselves represented in court fully. So,
thank you. Next question. Yeah?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming. I want to follow up on accountability and corruption that you mentioned. For the candidates that are in favor of a constitutional convention, what amendments would you propose to curb corruption?
And the question is directed at
term limits. I'll take that question.
All right. Anyone in favor of a convention?
One, our DAs, we don't, the power of a DA in New York is super incredible for anyone to understand. And this is where transparency comes in. Being transparent about what the powers of our DAs, who then have the right to prosecute and then keep our communities at bay when it comes to not being able to afford to be free. That's the first thing. Transparency in information, and we shouldn't have to. De Blasio's been the first one that complained about the FOIL Act not being respected when he was a council member, and yet his term in office, we have not just my brother's case, but constantly we have problems with trying to get information, or the Freedom of Information Act, enacted in the Department of Corrections. We need transparency in information. We need transparency in how we're spending or allocating our funds. When he constantly says that we don't have resources, and yet we do. It's just that where are you putting our funds to? Transparency is everything. But then corruption doesn't just end with our mayor. We have to get all of our systems to work together. It's not just in our, if you think that the Department of Corrections is all that I talk about, or all that, learn how that, let us take you where the Department of Corrections also has a hand in your Department of Finances, with the insurance companies that they back and support, or in the Department of Education, and how corruption doesn't just live in the court system, but everything's tied in. We need transparency and information, period.
Okay, thank you. Next question, please.
Okay, I hear a lot of people here today feeling angry that people are being raped and murdered, yet a lot of times they're seeing law enforcement resources being used to criminalize homeless and whatnot. And this question is for Aaron. How do we prioritize resources to protect lives and people's lives, yet not necessarily ignore and create a mechanism to deal with quality of life, but prioritize law enforcement to protect lives?
Yes, it's a balance. It's a struggle to maintain that balance, to make sure that we're not going too far in persecuting people, because that's the problem. It's gone from prosecuting to persecution, and we need to make sure that that's not what we're doing, and that's why I want to make sure that the government isn't doing. It's essential to have police focus on crimes that like you said, on rape or murder, on stopping terrorism, because our resources are not infinite, and police can't be everywhere at once. So we want to focus their attention on such violent crimes and not have them making us less safe by chasing a kid with a joint, and somebody, has a bomb and blows up, and kills a lot of people. We need to focus police attention on areas of violent crime, and we need to make sure that our civil liberties are protected, and get rid of, programs that make police and communities adversaries. That we can't have police acting as an occupying force instead of protectors, and that's why the community needs to be empowered to handle certain other issues of quality of life. Communities can work together, and we can be the solution to solve other problems, and let the police handle violent crime.
Thank you. Next question, please. Hi, Lewis.
My question is for Mike. I was wondering what your position on civil forfeiture is. From my understanding, New York State has pretty strong laws that protect the property rights of individuals, but there's a federal workaround through the equitable sharing program.
I'm a fan of individual freedom, and so I'm opposed to forfeiture. Is that it? That's it? All right. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Let's go down. Thank you all. This makes me realize that we need coalition governments in the entire country. My question is for Mr. Bashner regarding rent control and taxes on these super ultra mega luxury real estate apartments for the oligarchs, and also rent control for small biz. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding when co-ops first came into being in New York City, the valuation and the taxes were pegged to rent control units or the standard rental units in Manhattan. The mega apartments, luxury units, do not have that same valuation. There's nothing to compare them to in the market. So they get considerably lower taxes on $70 million properties. So I'm wondering how we can structure how they're purchased and what the taxes are then, so that they actually have a comparable tax rate for what they have, for either the valuation or whatever.
I'm with you.
The other thing is, de Blasio has totally fucked off with rent control. He thinks it's, which rent control was how I got fast mobility. I grew up poor with immigrant parents, and that allowed us to move up, and we have disregarded that. I'm wondering if we can get it both for residents and for small business, because I live in the East Village. We are losing everything, all our small businesses, to these corporate developers and all of de Blasio's friends. So.
I'm going to try to answer as many of those 7 questions as I can in the time I have. No, I love all of them, I really do. The first part, and I'll answer each of them fairly quickly. The first part about relative taxation of different types of properties. I think all of them should be taxed upon their fair market value. So if you have a $70 million apartment, it would be taxed at 70 times a $1 million apartment, and not look to what the potential rental stream is and things like that. So we have inequitable taxes across the city as a result of it. Some of it's racially discriminatory just in terms of its impact, and it's wrong. And there's no reason for it. They should all be done on the same basis based upon the value. That's the first thing. Second thing, in terms of fairness to different classes of property owners, Sal mentioned a pied-à-terre tax on certain class of people. I have a different approach, which is similar, which is I think that for owner-occupied apartments in New York, that we should have a tax reduction, like a homestead exemption, like Florida and many of the other states have. So for example, I would have 3 different classes. When people own and occupy their own apartments, they would pay a preferential rate because they live here and they own their apartments. For people who own their apartments and rent them out, I would treat that as a commercial activity at a higher tax rate, because after all, when they're renting those apartments out, they're not being owner-occupied. And for people who own second and third homes, which is what Sal was talking about in some cases, and they don't live here, they shouldn't be charged as much as people who rent it out, but they shouldn't pay as little as people who live in their own apartments. So I think that would create greater equity across the board. One of the things we want is economic justice, as well as criminal justice and social justice and everything else. So in terms of rent regulation, one of the things that I proposed, and I had a handout for this today, is we have a crisis for homelessness right now with 4,000 people on the street. It's up 40% from last year. One of the things that we have that incentivizes landlords to kick people out of their homes is that when a rent-stabilized apartment becomes vacant, you get a vacancy decontrol allowance, and or a vacancy allowance, I should say, and you get to add 20% to the rent. Now, what if we changed it around and said that whenever you have an empty rent-stabilized apartment, you have a 5% rent reduction? How many landlords would want to get rid of their tenants if they had to reduce the rent for a new tenant? None of them, okay? So that's one approach. Another approach is for non-regulated apartments. Right now, in many neighborhoods that are suffering from gentrification and fast-changing economic status, we have big jumps in rent for non-regulated apartments. And so you might have an apartment that rents for $2,500 a month, and suddenly the rent's going to be $3,500 a month. When that happens in the middle of this homeless emergency, we're putting people out of their homes. Maybe they'll become homeless, maybe they'll take another apartment that costs less, and then someone else won't get that apartment. But I think we need at least a couple of years to take a breather from those big increases and maybe cap it at 5% a year for a couple of years so that people don't have to move out, take some of the pressure off the homeless system. In terms of the commercial properties, again, I like the idea of a tax differential from sort of smaller existing leases where people pay lower rents and paying higher taxes if you're going to replace an old mom and pop store that pays a low rent with someone else that pays 3 times the rent. If they had to pay higher taxes, that would create a disincentive. I also think we're suffering a real blight from empty retail storefronts. What's happening there is that landlords are getting vacancies, they're leaving them vacant because rents have stalled and they can't get the rents they want, and rather than settle for what's reasonable and market, they're insisting upon higher rents. And there are some things, getting back to one of our other questions about banks, banks have loan covenants in their loans and say you have to have a certain rental level based upon what your projections were when you entered into the loan. And so if you take a rent that's too low, you blow your loan projections and your loan's in default. So sometimes some of those loans are keeping the store owners from, keeping the building owners from renting those very same retail spaces out for market rate because market rate doesn't support their loan. So I think we need to say having whole rows of storefronts empty is a blight on our city, and when we have a blight, we have to do something about it. And one thing that we could do is we could impose a penalty on any storefront that's left open for more than 9 months or a year, because there's only so long it takes to renovate and only so long it takes to get a tenant. And if it's beyond that, then you're being a speculator. And again, you're not using it for the purpose for which it's intended.
Okay, thank you for that answer. And last question is...
Can we get at least 5 of them?
In the interest of time, I'll try to make it quick. So I think we can all agree that housing and mass transit are at least top 10 issues in New York City, if not the top 5. And in my mind, I don't think they're two separate issues. A good mass transit system would reduce the pressure in housing prices. So you mentioned, this is my question, the question is for Mike. You mentioned that to do an end-to-end overhaul of the mass transit system, it would cost $25 million. And you said you will not tax the rich. And the only revenue stream that I saw was the NYC ride that you mentioned. I was wondering if you could elaborate more on that and how it would pay for the extremely expensive overhaul of the mass transit system. And this is in context of the national political environment of populist ideas and how realistic they are.
Great, well thank you for your question. So the first thing that I think is worth highlighting is the fact that this is an investment. It's not an expense where it's cash out the door and we never see it again. So we need to be modeling things out on a 10, 20, 30-year horizon as opposed to what it looks like over the next 4 and 8 years. So we're going to be bringing on a series of debt instruments, public-private partnership, grant programs, and NYC Enterprises, which is much more comprehensive than NYC Rides. NYC Rides is one of many ventures that we're going to be creating, ranging from e-commerce to early-stage research institutes in areas like artificial intelligence, biotech, and quantum computing, high-growth industries, to entertainment studios and so on and so forth. So we're going to have a lot of economic activity on behalf of the public sector that's going to create a viable long-term revenue stream that continues to sustain our venture growth, as well as fund these programs. But to jumpstart this, we need to bring on external capital, and that's what we're going to be doing in order to fund our $25 billion capital improvement program, as well as a series of other investments, both in our infrastructure and our services, as well as in our people. Investments in our people will pay off dividends longer term. There's going to be a ton of economic value created in the future. There's nobody in the world that would say, oh, the economy's going to fall apart tomorrow. The question is, where does all that economic value go? Is it going to Google and Facebook and Apple and Amazon? Or is it going to real estate developers? Or is it coming back to the people? And so what we're proposing is a shift in our economic system away from the capitalist model that we have today toward a fairer form of capitalism. So somebody had mentioned something about socialism. I'm not a socialist in the purest sense, but I'm both a democratic socialist as well as a free market capitalist. Those two systems can work collaboratively together alongside one another, and it's about time that we start thinking through the most logical approach from an economic perspective as well as from a political perspective for the needs of today.
Thank you. And thank you for all your questions. We're going to move to the next segment, and this is a bit experimental. It's called Lightning Round. Well, what it is it's like pop quiz roulette style. Okay, I'll just ask questions randomly to random candidates, and the response will be simply yes, no, or maybe I don't have an opinion, or either you support it or you're in opposition of it. And the reason why we do this is because 2 reasons. One is there's a lot of issues we're going to cover, and given the enormity of issues, we're not going to be able to cover everything, but this will at least highlight some of the important issues. Plus, I think many of you sitting in the audience are interested in the policy positions of these candidates, so at least you'll kind of get a glimpse of what their policy positions are. So with that being said, the first question goes to Mr. Gangi. Do you support the plastic bag ban?
Yes.
Okay. What about you, Mr. Commey? The plastic bag ban, banning the plastic bags from shopping stores. Okay. The next question is for Mr. Tolkin. Do you support a bill that would ban food on subways, eating on subways?
No, although I think everyone should exercise common decency.
All right, what about you, Mr. Bashner?
I eat on the subway all the time. Although I have to say, open drinks is a problem.
The next question is regarding gun laws in New York City. Mr. Browder, do you think that gun laws in New York City are too rigid, not too rigid, or status quo is acceptable?
You said, what was the last thing you said? Status quo is acceptable? I go against the status quo. So no, I think gun laws in New York, even in the US, is too rigid, too strict.
Okay, what about you, Mr. Gangi?
The gun law is too strict, you mean because we have mandatory sentencing for gun laws? Is that what you're
That's
talking
correct, yes.
about? No, we should not have mandatory sentencing for anything.
Okay. The next question is regarding the Paris Climate Agreement. Under the Albanese administration, what steps, or would you take certain steps to abide by certain goals set forth in the Paris Climate Accord?
I would make New York City a model of environmental regulations that would comply with the Paris Accord. Absolutely.
Okay, what about you, Mr. Commey? Paris Accord?
I would comply with anything that has met the Darwin standard.
The what?
The Darwin standard. In other words, make sure that the research is proven to be effective and accurate.
It stands for like a legal standard where certain technical experts and those expert reports are admissible in a court of law. And I guess this could be applicable since Paris Accord is legally binding to some extent. Okay, the next question is regarding the New York City ID. Mr. Bashner, do you think that's a good idea or do you oppose it?
New York City ID cards?
ID cards.
I think it's a great idea.
Okay, what about you, Mr. Commey?
Yes, it's helpful.
The next question is universal pre-K. Do you support that idea, Mr. Gangi?
Sorry, I think yes, me?
Yes.
Yes, and it should be universal, it should go down to start with infants.
Okay. The next series of questions deal with so-called gig economy. So, Mr. Tolkin, do you think on balance, has Uber been a positive force or negative?
It's a really complicated question. I think the net result of it, I don't know. I think they've innovated a model that works and that is popular and well received. On the other hand, you ask any Uber driver what they think of their job, and they would tell you they were making more last year than this year, and their rent's through the roof, and they're not able to put food on the table. So I don't think that's a good model.
Okay. Mr. Gangi, what about Airbnb?
Don't have it for me.
Okay.
Doesn't matter.
City Bike, what about you, Mr. Commey? Do you support the program or do you not?
Yes.
City Bike.
Great program.
Okay.
Expand it to the outer boroughs.
Okay, the next question is a bit historic, because someone mentioned Jane Jacobs earlier. So what about Robert Moses? And the reason why I asked that is because our group actually did a book discussion on the power broker. So Mr. Gangi, do you think on balance, Robert Moses was a positively contributing factor in New York City landscape?
I don't think you can answer that simply. He did some great things, great enterprises, but he also damaged communities, drove people out of the neighborhoods, exercised far too much power without sufficient accountability.
What about you, Mr. Albanese?
I agree with Bob on that. I mean, I represented an area where Robert Moses drove a highway right through a neighborhood and basically displaced literally hundreds, thousands of people. He basically had too much power.
Okay. The next question is to Mr. Browder. There was a casino that was built in Queens recently. I believe it's called the Resorts World Casino near the JFK Airport. Do you support that project?
I think anything that helps give individual and small businesses a chance to thrive. Anything that takes away from small businesses, I'm always against.
And Mr. Bashner?
I'm not a fan of casinos. The house always wins, and they prey on people who are out of control and have gambling problems in many cases. So I'm against.
Okay. The next set of questions deal with the low-level crimes. So let's start with Mr. Commey. Should we decriminalize open containers, like alcohol containers on the street?
Yes.
Okay. What about you, Mr. Tolkin? Open containers. Okay. Decriminalize, yes. The next question is decriminalizing the use of marijuana on the sidewalks. Mr. Albanese?
I support legalization of marijuana.
Same here.
Not on the sidewalks. I think that we need to tax it regularly like we do alcohol. And there are a couple of models across the country that we can emulate. Colorado being the lead, where they have areas where you can buy marijuana, store that's marijuana for recreational purposes. And so that's my position.
Okay, Mr. Gangi. Decriminalizing.
The question is, decriminalize marijuana?
Decriminalizing the use of marijuana in the public.
Yes.
What about decriminalizing prostitution, Mr. Commey?
Yes.
Mr. Browder?
Decriminalize prostitution?
Yes.
To decriminalize, of course.
Okay. What about turnstile jumping? Should that be not a criminal offense, Mr. Tolkin?
I don't believe it should be a criminal offense.
What about you?
Let me just sort of, I think the solution is to address the economic inequality that exists, and we need to make transit free for there you go.
I thought that was Mike's answer.
And what about you, Mr. Albanese? Turnstile jumping, fare evasion?
Well, I think that certainly people should not be arrested for it, but if they're repeat offenders, they should face some kind of penalty.
Okay. The next question is the Atlantic Yards, which is now the Barclays Center. Mr. Bashner, do you think that was a project that was worthwhile pursuing?
We fought the Atlantic Yards project in my community board. We voted against it 37-3. None of the promised affordable housing has still been built, so in its form, no. Strongly against it. I love the arena though.
Okay, Mr. Browder, the Atlantic Yards?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, do you support the Atlantic Yards project that ultimately became the Barclays Center?
No comment.
Okay. All right, we're going to move on. Oh, one more question. Those restaurant letter grades that you see outside the restaurant, Mr. Tolkin, do you think that's a good idea?
Conceptually, sure.
Okay. Mr. Gangi?
Yes.
Okay. Before we move on to the closing statements, I want to ask one more question. And I know we should always hold the incumbent accountable and be critical of the positions. Anyone sitting at this table tonight, is there anything that this mayor has done that is worthy of applaud?
Not at all.
And actually, it's a two-part question. So if anyone wants to take that on, the first part is yes, he did something that's worthwhile of pursuing, and part B, under your administration, what would you do to enhance that? So does anyone want to take that on?
Yes. Thinking about the people first instead of running away and accepting corporate and union dollars to make sure you think of them first instead of the communities that you represent. De Blasio represents, for the last 4 years, was supposed to represent the people. How many people here actually feel that de Blasio represented them?
Okay, but the question is there anything that you applauded for?
No, I said no in the beginning.
Okay, well, I want to ask the rest of the candidates.
You asking everybody?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, why don't we just, if anyone has something that
Sure, I think universal pre-K is something that we all thought was desperately needed. We know the project Head Start has worked for a long time. But we can't just dangle one shiny object in front of voters and say universal pre-K, now we fix the whole school system.
And actually, that wasn't his. I'm
sorry, if you could let me finish
went for universal free pre-K for all, not universal pre-K.
Okay, just to finish my answer, I think universal pre-K was a brilliant idea. Many of us supported it, and that's one of the reasons that the first year of the mayor's term was not so bad. But as I started to say, that doesn't solve the whole educational system. When kids turn 5 and 6, and 7 and 8, you have to make sure they can read and do math. And right now we have 60% of the kids who don't pass their tests for 4th grade in reading and math. And then they go on to middle school, and it gets worse from there. By the time they get to high school, we have a separate and unequal school system where kids are not getting an education. So I think that I would work on the entire school system, not just the part before you get there.
So under the Bashner administration, what would you do to improve the current system?
Well, we need to make available to all of the kids across New York City the resources that the kids who are successful have. So the best teacher practices need to spread to all of the students. We need to have a robust after-school tutoring program to make sure that the kids don't fall behind. We have to have something like the Khan Academy, which supplied the SAT program with free tutoring, and we could be doing a free tutoring program for all of our kids for not only the SAT, but the SHSAT, which is the Selective High School Admission Test for Stuyvesant, and for all of the other selective schools. We could do it for all the Regents exams. We could do it for subject exams, and we wouldn't necessarily even have to pay teachers. Teachers love to teach and would probably do some of these supplemental lessons for free. And okay,
this guy over here.
The teachers who love.
I want to move on because we're almost running out of time.
His time is up.
Mr. Commey, can you think of anything that this mayor has done that's worthy of?
There's no slave labor here.
Okay. Mr. Albanese?
I agree with Richard. Universal pre-K is a good thing. I would focus on reducing class size. I think that's one of the most important things that we need to do in terms of education outcomes. I would also open pediatric wellness centers in poor communities where we start working with young people with babies. From 0 to 3 is the most important age, and 95% of the brain develops during that period of time. And poverty causes stress, and stress causes chemical changes. When these kids go into our school buildings at 4 or 5 years of age, they have anger management issues. They can't make decisions because it's not an IQ issue. It's the stress from living in poverty, domestic violence, drug abuse, all that has an impact.
Black teachers.
And pediatric wellness centers would be a team of doctors and nurses that would work with mothers and babies during the gestation period and then when they're born, so that we can address those issues. I think that's very important. We could save an awful lot of money and really help a lot of kids.
Okay, thanks. Mr. Tolkin?
I'm going to decline to answer the question, and here's why. The fact that it's a question is a problem. There should be so many accomplishments over the past 4 years that we should, of course, be saying, yeah, like, no, there are a million things that he's done very well. So the fact that that's not the case, and we can sort of, on 2 hands, or maybe 1 hand, talk about his accomplishments is a massive problem, and any person on stage here will tell you that we have lots of priorities, lots of challenges, but lots of things that need to get done and will get done over the next 4 years.
Universal Pre-K was a good program, a good idea, and without its leadership, probably would have happened. And it should be extended, as I said before, to infants. His appointments to the Rent Stabilization Board kept rents from rising for rent stabilized apartment. That was another good idea.
And real quick, I already said no. I don't believe. And here's why. He says a lot. Our incumbent says a lot, but doesn't do a lot. 3 months into his office, his running, he had dropped the universal free pre-K for all. That was what he was running, not universal pre-K for all. Universal free pre-K for all put women back to work because that's what he incited for people to vote for him, which was he wants to get women that had kids or have kids back to work, and that was a good thing. But when you get the votes to get into office and then drop the free part, because that's what we need. We need more things from the government to say, here's how we help you out because you are a taxpayer and you live in our city. We will help you out, women and children. Not then after drop it and then just now if you can afford it. Everything's what you can afford in New York City instead of what we can give you. And that's where we need to start giving more money, 99% more money to our schools and not our jails or our wars that we fight in the country, and focusing on in-house so that we can fix our relative issues in-house.
We're running out of time almost. We're going to wrap it up with closing statements in reverse alphabetical order. But before we do that, it's almost 9:30, so the cash bar is going to close. So if you need to grab a drink, please do so now. And please be sure to tip the bartender generously for hanging out with us tonight. And with that being said, originally it was going to be a 5-minute closing statement, but we're going to have to cut it down to 3 minutes. I'm sorry, everyone, but in the interest of time, we're going to have to pare it down. So with that being said, we will start with Mr. Tolkin's closing statement.
Well, thank you again for having me. I want to circle back on a couple of issues that were brought up in the questions that I didn't have personally the opportunity to address. One is with respect to affordable housing. It's a massive problem, and of course the root of it is economic injustice, but we need to play a much more centralized, active role in creating many new affordable housing units for singles, for couples, for families. We need to be addressing our homelessness crisis head on by creating entirely new rehabilitation centers with interim safe housing, with mental health services, comprehensive physical care, and again, job training programs. So it's not just about getting people off the street, but actually helping them to get back on their feet and reintegrate themselves into society in a value-added way. We talked a little bit about trans rights. One of I happen to be, and this has not been part of our campaign at all, but because of what's going on at a national level, I've decided to speak up a little bit about it. But I happen to be a gay cisgender man, and it's really important to me that we are elevating intersectionally the challenges. And so when you talk about, the trans community has sort of been left behind. You had gay marriage, we've made a lot of progress. So it's really important that we break out our trans brothers, sisters, and family members to give them the focus that they deserve, and to make sure that we're not just providing equal rights, but also the equal access to healthcare that they need, and to be treated with the dignity and respect that they deserve. So thank you for, say again?
Jobs and housing.
Jobs, housing, all of the above. But it's really important that we continue to not just talk about social justice and the need to protect our immigrants and our Black and brown communities and our LGBTQ communities and our trans communities, but to actually take action to do so, to put in place plans in our city that serve as a model for all other cities. And so the last point I'll make is with respect to some of these massive challenges from a social justice standpoint, with respect to climate change, with respect to healthcare, we're going to be putting in place an entirely new program called Smart Cities. And this will be an alliance of progressive cities across the country where we work collaboratively to put in place policy and development initiatives that collectively drive society forward. So it's not just, we'll lead the way, but we want to make sure that we are systemically evolving our systems to meet the needs of today, and even more important than that, to meet the needs of tomorrow. We should not be building the city that we want. We should be building the city that our children will want, and they should do that for theirs.
Thank you. Mr. Gangi.
Reminding what I said at the beginning, reminding people the main commitment of our campaign and the main commitment of our administration, of our elected mayor, will be to promote social, racial, and economic justice for everybody in our city. And we have very specific policy proposals that we will pursue. Small class size for all the 1.1 million children who go to our schools, truly affordable housing that will be, when we build housing in low-income communities, the people who live in those communities will be able to afford to pay the rents for those houses. If they can't, then the city will subsidize it. We will initiate public work crews that will provide decent paying jobs for and underemployed people from our inner cities, and we will put those work crews to work helping to provide affordable housing, clean up our subways, clean up our parks, and fix the roads in the city which are in terrible shape. We will directly go at and create fundamental reforms in policing in New York City. We will end broken windows policing. We will end the quota system, which victimizes low-income people of color every day in our city who engage in low-level infractions that are going to be criminalized in the white communities. We will fire on day one all the police officers involved in the death of Eric Garner. It is a shame for our city, it is a shame for our mayor, that those officers, over 3 years after they engaged in reckless actions that contributed directly to the death of Eric Garner, ignoring him saying 11 times, "I cannot breathe." We will fire those men on day one. We will make sure when there's a person in psychiatric crisis in our community, we will not be sending a police officer or police officers to deal with that person. We will be sending mental health professionals as first responders. And that way we will save lives rather than take lives. We will be promoting free CUNY tuition for low and middle income New Yorkers. We will be not promoting, we will be enacting free fare for our subways and our buses for low income New Yorkers. We will be taking specific steps to address the problems of violence against trans people, particularly against trans women, and that includes ending the abuse and the mistreatment by the NYPD of trans people and trans women. The goals of all these steps, all these actions, is to create a livable, affordable, safe, and just city for all of New Yorkers, and that will benefit primarily the low-income people of color who primarily suffer from the racist practices of the government agencies, but it will benefit everybody in our city. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Commey's closing statements.
Yes, government needs to be providing long-term solutions, and it needs to be better at doing it. I'm running because I want to help people, New Yorkers, stop struggling. I want them to achieve what they're fighting for. So I look forward to being able to work with people like Alex Merced, who's running for comptroller, who has a background in finance and will be able to systematically look for areas where the government can be improving where there's waste, so that funds can go to much needed programs. I look forward to working with people like Ryan Waddell, who's running for Manhattan Borough President, who realizes that the functions of a borough president could be done by other people existing in government, and $20 million could automatically go back into providing valuable programs for New Yorkers. I look forward to working with people like Devin Balkin, who has a brilliant idea about open sourcing government so that you can have transparency in government and that the people of New York can provide input into what they want government to do for them. This is what government needs to do. Government needs to be working together to be more efficient, to provide solutions for you and to help you provide solutions, because we don't have all the answers. We're going to need input from the people, and we're going to need to work with the people to make sure that government is actually helping and not causing more problems than it's causing problems that it's supposed to be solving. This is why I'm running, and why I encourage people to go to my website and votecommey.com, and you'll see details about plans I have, from education to housing to criminal justice reform. So, I will have comprehensive information on there, and you can see these are the programs and the ways I intend to implement solutions that can actually help us stop struggling.
Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. I shared with you in the beginning a bit about myself, as well as my vision for what the Green Party intends on doing, and where you can go further to see that is on our website, since this is a limited time. But at the beginning of this debate, I asked that you keep in mind what it means to be your brother's keeper. I'm not a career politician, and nor will I ever be. When I started running for mayor, I got into this because I saw New York as a place that I've lived and grown up in and didn't want to see fail for our kids in the future and for our family members now. It doesn't take 10 years, it doesn't take 4 years. We can start making change now if we start working together. And that doesn't mean that we have to work together only in the ways that we have in the past. We can't keep on looking at the past to dictate what we should be doing for our future. We should be starting to say to ourselves, what is it that we're not doing so that we can get to the place that we need to go? Which one, it doesn't take lip service and it doesn't take someone always throwing it in our face. One, that we are minorities. When it comes to our communities, we are all human beings, we are all people of this nation, and how do we get together and how do we bring everyone together shouldn't look like separation. Divide and conquer tactics has done its job to all of us, whether you're black or white, whether you're Hispanic, whether you're gay or straight, it does not matter. The separations need to stop, and the separate New York that we live in, the divided New York that we live in, has brought us to where we are now. What we need is a person in office, and it doesn't take one person. Although I'm running for mayor, I want to involve all of our communities to get into a place that we can stop leaning on the government only to do the work that we can be doing for ourselves. Realistically, we've given a lot of power up to these government entities that then doesn't do anything for us. When we put in a new structure that involves people first and then economy, then we can start seeing a difference where we're not messing up our ecology so that we can suffer in the long run with polluted waters, with our air that's not really livable for future sustainment. When we start doing things different, we start seeing things different, and that's why with the Green Party, although I had a chance to run as a Democrat, I realized for the last 45 years we've been doing the same thing over and over, electing Democrats and Republicans in office, doing the same thing, because when you get in office, guaranteed there's already a platform for you waiting and going to welcome you in. Here's what you're supposed to do, here's what we've been doing for the past 45 years, and here's what we're going to continue to do. Not with the Green Party and not in our New York City. That's what I'm going for. Thank you.
I've been traveling all over the city and speaking to voters, and what I see is a lot of people very unhappy about Donald Trump as president. A lot of people are very unhappy about Bill de Blasio as mayor. I see people demoralized. They feel like there's nothing we can do. Well, I want to tell you there is something we can do. I'm running for mayor. And if you vote for me, and if you go to my website at bashner2017.com to find more information about all of the different proposals that I've been making, you'll see that there are a lot of things that we could be doing right now to fight de Blasio, fight Trump, and to try to take back our city from the politicians and from the people that we've lost it to. In New York City, de Blasio seems to think that everything is great, but it's not. We have 60% of our kids are not passing their 4th grade math and reading tests. Our high school graduation rate is terrible. We still have separate and unequal schooling 60 plus years after Brown versus Board of Education. It's just wrong. We talked about our subways before. I want to talk a little bit about criminal justice. 80% of the people who are sent to Rikers Island have not been convicted of a crime. What that means is that only 20% of the people at Rikers Island actually belong there because they've been convicted of a crime. The rest are there because we have a bad bail system that sets bail too high and people can't afford it, and so we take them out of their everyday lives and they find themselves in jail, unable to defend themselves properly because they can't get to their lawyers as easily as they might. Some of them, while they're in jail, they lose their jobs. Some of them, they lose custody of their children or their apartments. They may lose their immigration status. And we are allowing a great evil to occur. It's a great moral issue. It's a civics issue. It's very vitally important. And on top of that, it's just a bad waste of taxpayer money to spend all that money to lock people up. So we also have discriminatory policing still. 90% of the people arrested for marijuana over the past 3 years were black or Latino. Now, you can't go into neighborhoods and arrest everybody and then say, okay, could you please tell us who the drug dealers are, and could you tell us who the terrorists are? And by the way, tell us who the gangs are, because you can trust us. We need to restore trust between our communities and our police and the people who are being policed. And we need to do it in a way that's fair. It needs to be a complete reset, because unless you break with the old practices, no one's going to trust you. And this mayor has squandered all the goodwill that he came into office with, where he said he was going to protect the most vulnerable New Yorkers, and what has he done instead? He hasn't. And we need to start taking care of our people. We need to take care of not only our seniors and our young people, but people with disabilities across the city are underserved. Accessorite is just one example. My mom had cancer recently, and there's no place for people to go and to get proper care. And I think we need to take care of all of the most vulnerable members of our society in a way that's cost effective and spends our money much better than we're currently doing. So what I'd like to ask you to do is to, again, take a look at my website for some of the ideas at bashner2017.com. And please show up on Tuesday, vote, tell all of your friends to vote. If not for me, then someone else up here on the stage, because Mayor de Blasio has to go. Thank you.
Mr. Albanese.
Thank you, and congratulations to all of you for staying so late to listen to all of us. This has been a great discussion. I consider myself the New York City story. I came here as an immigrant at the age of 8. My mother was a garment worker. She supported us on a garment worker's salary. I attended the public schools, went to the City University of New York, and the tuition was for free. And went on to teach in the public schools for 11 years. Was elected to the City Council, a liberal Democrat in a very conservative area, and I championed the gay rights bill, and I passed the city's first living wage law and the second living wage law in America in 1996. That Rudy Giuliani vetoed, and we overrode his veto. And I came out of the city council with a reputation for independence and integrity. Even my detractors will tell you that. I then went to law school at night, got my law degree, and worked in finance and law for the last 20 years, and mainly with labor and working people. And those experiences prepared me for the best job in America, which is the mayor of New York City. I have a vision to make the city much better, and under this administration we've seen it slide backwards. I want to begin by reforming our corrupt political system, unless we change that, nothing will change. And my plan, called Democracy Vouchers, based on the Seattle model, will work like this. Every single New York City voter will receive 4 $25 vouchers, and they can donate that to anyone running for office, municipal office. And whether you're a NYCHA resident or you're a hedge fund manager, you will get the same 4 $25 vouchers, forcing candidates to interact with regular people instead of what goes on now. They're calling people who do business with the city for $5,000 donations and bumbling the money. That will all go away without this administration. I will also pass a lobbying reform bill, so when people leave government and come back and become influence peddlers, we will eliminate that. It's 5 years before you can go back and lobby. So that is a fundamental issue that we need to address. And that's a problem that impacts the Democrats, Republicans, and everyone across the board. Unless we change that, nothing else will really change. And I'm committed to that. It's been a passion of mine since I went into government. I also want to address the mass transit system. You've heard of my proposals in that area. And the other area that I've been talking about was how do we save our small businesses in this city? We have empty storefronts everywhere. There's an epidemic. There's a bill in the City Council which I will pass called the Small Business Job Survival Act, which means that if you're a tenant in good standing, you own a store, you go into mediation with the landlord. And if the mediation doesn't work, you go into arbitration. We'll eliminate these rent increases of $1,000, 1,000% a month, which are wiping out small businesses. The Lower East Side, the Upper East Side, and all around the city, you see empty storefronts. 1,000 small businesses a month are going out in this city. And many of them are immigrants, by the way, in the first step of the economic ladder. That Small Business Job Survival Act will address that issue make neighborhoods, once again, thriving places where store owners and merchants have an interaction with the community, and also they were also part of the civic life in neighborhoods, and we're wiping that out. And Mayor de Blasio has not addressed that one. We're at a crisis level. 1,000 small businesses a month are going out, and every one of those small businesses impacts about 8 other folks. So I really would ask you to consider my candidacy, and all of us up here, I think, are very good candidates for mayor. And go to my website, voteforsal.com. You'll see the rest of my proposals. Thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Albanese, and thank you to all the candidates. So we have 6 candidates, 6 different visions for the city, our city. And I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight, because this is democracy at its finest. And there's 3 days left before the primaries, and I want to wish each and all of you best of luck. It's a long slog, but we do thank you for what you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks,